The final girl is the one who usually gets out alive. She does it because she recognizes what the threat is. And while other characters are trying to balance their needs and their desires with their desire for safety, usually the final girl puts safety first. She's the first one who figures it out, which is to say, she is thinking the way that you, the audience, are thinking. You know there's a killer. She knows the killer. Everybody else doesn't know there's a killer. Why are they so dumb? In the sense, it's also kind of it's a survival movie the way a disaster movie is. Not necessarily a survival movie the way it is in the 2020s, but it is about sort of, can you survive this deluge of evil that's about to come onto your town?
In today's new episode of Crawlspace, we speak with Adam Jortner. Adam is a doctor and a professor of history, and he wrote an incredible lecture series called Slash and Grab, Horror of the 1980s. And this is part of the Great Courses series, and he's written a few of these. This is a really fun conversation. Lance, what'd you make of this?
Yeah, no question about it. When I saw this pop up on my Audible recommended for you section, I want to preface this by saying this is not an Audible sponsored episode. Audible has created this series called The Great Courses. They have professors on, doctors on. They talk about things in their wheelhouse and outside of their wheelhouse, and Adam was one of these. And when this popped up as recommended for you, I mean, the title alone, yes, it's about 80s slasher movies, the genesis of those, the genesis of horror movies and how the rating system came into play, some behind the scenes looks into how certain horror movies were made, and overall just a great listen, very educational, and surprisingly something that stays with you far after listening to it. You start to see these themes that Adam talks about in a lot of other pop culture moments. Tim, what did you think of this?
This is a lot of fun, Lance. This is one of my favorite topics of all time. Literally, movies, more specifically horror movies, and even more specifically slasher movies from the 80s. Literally, my jam. Inspired me to make my own movie called Pan Man that you can stream on Tubi. But this episode is about Mr. Jortner's work, and definitely check out this lecture series from Audible called Slash and Grab. Think you'll really like it. He's written a few others, and I have a feeling he's going to be a return guest, Lance.
Yeah, he does have that air about him that he will be a Crawlspace regular, and we're happy to have him on as long as he's happy to join us. And you can check out everything that he's got going on at his website, adamjortner.com, and his last name is spelled Jortner.
Please follow us on social media at Crawlspace Podcast or Crawlspace Pod. We're going to break quick for commercial here, and we'll be right back with Adam Jortner.
And we're back with Dr. Adam Jortner.
Welcome to the podcast, Adam Jortner. Adam, how are you today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Yes, you are welcome on anytime you want. We are so happy that we are introducing you as a new friend of the show. We just spoke for a few minutes before we started recording, and I think that we have quite a rapport at this point. So we go way back now.
We go way back. We're all interested in unusual things. I think we all took some books out of the library as kids, and other grown-ups were like, what is that?
Maybe don't go down that aisle.
Adam, why are you reading the Satanic Bible? It's for research.
Hey, can you introduce yourself to the listeners? A little bit about your background?
Sure. My name's Adam Jortner. I'm a professor of history at Auburn University. I have spent the last 15 years doing historical studies of things like witchcraft and monsters and miracles, new religions, what are sometimes called cults, Then I started getting very interested in movie monsters. That is what has brought me to your door.
And you did mention the Satanic Bible, correct? I didn't mishear you?
I teach classes on new religions, one in U.S. history, and so I did have to check out a book called The Satanic Bible, which was written by Anton LaVey, who was founded the Church of Satan. And the thing I love to teach people about the Church of Satan is that it actually split into two. And they split not over doctrinal issues, but over whether Anton LaVey got to be in charge. So in a sense, the Church of Satan said, listen, we may worship the god of the underworld, but you will not rule over us like some kind of cult leader. We're going to have a democratic Church of Satan. And they became a group called the Church of Set. This really happened. I don't know if this is bringing people into the podcast.
We are asking the questions that are on the tips of everybody's tongue at this point.
Okay. Yeah, so I take books out about Satanism and I get some odd looks.
That's okay. That's okay. I mean, of all the things to get odd looks for, that's fine. Are you familiar with the Satanic Temple?
Remind me.
The Satanic Temple that is in Salem, Massachusetts. Lucian Greaves is the spokesperson for the Satanic Temple.
Yes, I am familiar. I very, very early in my career, I was a tour guide in Salem, so I'm very.
Stop it!
Yeah, it was great, and one of the things that I started getting really interested in, it was being in Salem, but not talking about the witch trials. Started getting really interested in sort of, well, what's the history of witchcraft, and the fact that there weren't actually witches in 1692. It was all a hoax, not a hoax, so to speak, but Christians accusing other Christians of being Satanists, which has really sort of driven a lot of the work I've done to sort of say, whoa, how do our ideas about what evil is, about what the devil is, how do those shape our behaviors, because people have changed how they think about those things.
And you are just full of incredible information, and you have done several Audible series, and we have consumed one that we were really excited to speak with you about. It's called Slash and Grab, Horror of the 1980s. But I do just want to note that you have several of these available to listen to on Audible. And if they're anything like Slash and Grab, I'm sure they're excellent.
Thanks very much. I really like them, and I love the format of we're just talking about something for 4 or 5 hours.
So these are like an educational series that Audible is offering in the form of like what looks like an audio book. That's correct?
Right. So Slash and Grab is, 10 half-hour lectures. Lectures is a strong word.
Didn't feel like a lecture.
It's bite-sized little, half-hour commentaries or discussions of the history of the horror films of the 80s, what you might call splatter films, what you might call slasher films. It's not just slasher films. All of these movies, which those of us of a certain age grew up with at these video stores, much of which, has shaped the way we think of monsters today, and which were also, in retrospect, just kind of crazy. These movies that got made that are just nuts. And I wanted to explain how this happened to people my age. I want to be like, look, here's why a bunch of these cheap films get made in the 1980s and not before. And then I wanted to explain to people who were younger than me, this is how people used to consume movies, particularly horror movies. In the last 15 years, the way we see movies has completely changed. The way we think about movies has completely changed. And I wanted to teach people, here is how your parents and even your grandparents, here's how they saw movies and how movies shaped them in a way we don't have anymore. And so that's everything from how does a video store get created, or before video stores, if you missed a movie at the theaters, you just missed it. And people would just show up at drive-ins and they'd be like, what's playing? And that kind of world is sort of it's being forgotten. I wanted to try to save it a little bit.
Okay, so the first movie that I ever rented, or I didn't rent, my parents did, for VHS. But the first movie we rented on VHS was Mr. Mom with Michael Keaton.
Yep, absolutely.
It was a comedy and, seemed like a harmless movie. Can you guess the second movie we rented as a family?
I cannot. Please tell me.
Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1.
You are kidding.
That's the second movie that we rented.
That is a very different movie.
Yes, it was quite a departure from Mr. Mom.
But you sort of are looking at, again, something, this idea of you're going to get a comedy one week and a horror movie the next week. This is something that the video stores didn't exist in 1975, and they more or less don't exist now. But for that time, suddenly all the movies were kind of in one place, and you could actually go through and try to pick out the movies. And the movie studios hated this, because their idea was, no, we own the movies. A movie isn't something you can take home and see on your TV set. That's insane. Part of what happened was most of the people for a while there, the people who ran video stores did it on their own. They had no corporate support. They were mom and pop businesses. And if somebody there loved Nightmare on Elm Street, they would put it up prominently. Or if they loved, some of the stranger, John Frankenheimer or Herschel Gordon Lewis, if you know who those people are, they would promote those, and those would be seen, right next to The Godfather or, any of these classic cinemas. So it sort of is a way in which a lot of people, like you, perhaps Lance, maybe got introduced to horror and gore way too early. And I count myself in that crowd.
Well, I think I'm glad that it was A Nightmare on Elm Street. If there was to be like a choice of horror or slasher movies that I would have consumed for the first time, because it's so clearly like not based in reality, right? He's a dream demon that is like coming out of people's nightmares. So that isn't so bad as watching maybe, I don't know, Halloween, where it's a physical thing, Like it felt more fantastical to me, I think.
And it's probably better than Sleepaway Camp 3 as well.
Ooh, good call. Yes.
Sure. Yeah. One of the fun things for this was my job, was to sort of see a lot of the schlock. I think this might be. Should I tell the story of where these movies come from? Is this a good time for that?
Sure.
Yeah. I actually thought that was one of the more interesting parts of your lecture. Was you didn't start in the 80s. You started from a time before, way before.
The time before time. So 30 seconds of nerd. One thing I like to point out is that when you're doing history, you're looking at things that are different. You look at people in the past, I think, are different than us just because they live in a different world. So it's really important not just to understand what happened, but also when it happened. So why do you get these movies in the 80s? First of all, in the 1930s, way, way back, Hollywood develops a production code, which is like censorship, but different. Because all of the major studios agree that they're not going to put certain things in movies. And of course, that includes things like gore and extreme horror and nudity. But it also includes things like you cannot show authority figures in a bad light. You can't have a movie about a corrupt cop. You can't have a movie where the cops are the bad guys. You can't put religion in a bad light. So the priest always has to be a good guy. And there are definitely some movies that come up to the edge, but then sort of pull back. And this code governs Hollywood for 30 years into the middle of the 60s. It finally collapses for various reasons. And then the studios are still generally trying to produce the same kind of movies, but the end of the code meant now different kinds of movies can be shown in major theaters. Which is to say, there were always films that, you'll be shocked to know that pictures of naked people have almost always been popular among a certain crowd. You could find your way to them. They existed in the 50s. Now those begin to be shown in other kinds of movie theaters. It's the great age of what's called the grindhouse theaters, which are the sort of lower budget film houses that show non-code approved movies. And actually what starts to happen in the 60s and early 70s is, there's still a lot of schlock, but some of those movies are actually really, really quite good. At the exact same time, Hollywood goes through a financial slump. So what do? They reach out to the grindhouse and they start making movies kind of like this. The Godfather, incredibly bloody movie, very violent. If you haven't seen it, authority figures are not painted in a good light in that movie. And spoiler alert, good does not triumph over evil. You get those kinds of movies that are sort of mainstreaming the violence. And what you get in the horror realm of horror is you start getting bloodier movies. You start getting more nudity in movies. The film that really sort of cracks the code is Friday the 13th. The reason it is able to do that is, I think, for two reasons. One is it focuses on teens having a good time, which is to say, I didn't come up with this, other historians have thought of this. It has elements of a teen movie, and then it throws in the serial killer. You have serial killers in movies before Friday the 13th, but this sort of mixes them together. And the other thing is, it's backed by a major studio. It's the first slasher film, the first really cheaply made horror film to get a wide release in America, in not Grindhouse Studios, but major studios. It goes gangbusters. It opens a few weeks after Empire Strikes Back, and it's the second biggest movie after Empire Strikes Back in 1980, which is saying something. Once it has such incredible success, other major studios, of course, try to duplicate it. And this is pretty common. If something works, you make a lot of it. This is where, over the next, particularly in 80, 81, 82, 83, they just made over 100 of these movies. Some very good, some horribly, some not. But keeping to this idea of low budget, cheap thrills, you have an unknown cast of teens, and there's somebody going around with some kind of creative way to kill people. What sets the sort of the 80s splatter or slasher film apart is the goal of the movie it's not a whodunit. It's a who's next. You know when you sit, again, listen to Grandpa Adam tell you about the 80s. You know when you sit down to watch a slasher, usually the mystery is not who the killer is. You know who the killer is. You're just waiting to see the characters get knocked off. And that's basically the formula that Hollywood then takes and runs into the ground in the 80s, in part because these things they're so cheap to make that you can make 10 or 20 of them every year. And if you only get returns on one or two, you're ahead of the game. You've made a profit.
I loved the fact that Friday the 13th, and that's what kind of surprised me when listening to your lecture, is that Friday the 13th was the one that broke the mold. And I think in my head, I always thought that Halloween was, but that really didn't. I love the fact that Sean Cunningham, who created Friday the 13th, never denied saying, I wanted a copy. I wanted to copy Halloween. But he didn't even have the script, right? Before he got the funding for the movie.
Right. Obviously, fans of your podcast will probably be familiar with John Carpenter's film Halloween from 1978. And I'm going to be clear about this. I know as a historian, I'm not supposed to say certain movies are better than others, but Halloween is a better movie than Friday the 13th. Now, I don't think Friday the 13th is that bad, but Halloween is it's a masterpiece. It's it's very, very scary. Almost no blood in it. Halloween, though, is a very terse film, and it is released very slowly, which is to say nobody thought this Halloween movie is going to do anything. So it actually gets regional releases. So it might be released in one part of the country, and then word gets around, particularly on college campuses, this great movie Halloween is coming. And then there it is. There's no internet. There's no previews for you to see. So it's mostly word of mouth that builds and builds and builds. And Halloween runs, for a year or two. And it makes a lot of money. Cunningham deliberately copies that, but he has a major simultaneous release, which is to say that, again, I think Halloween's the better movie, but the movie that really kickstarts the slasher craze is Friday the 13th, not because of how good a movie it is, but because of the way in which it's released, the economics of how to release a horror film in the 1980s. For those of you who do not remember this, you had no idea what was coming out in the year to come. They just often sort of showed up. And I know that my children right now, we're really waiting for the film Project Hail Mary, which is coming out in April. We've already seen the previews, and it's a lovely experience I'm having with them. Nothing like what I had, someone in the 80s would have had. These movies just showed up. Part of what made these films controversial was that they just start showing up in megaplexes, which are also new, and families coming to see movies in theaters where they had not seen bloody knives on coming attraction posters before suddenly are. Looking through the newspaper at the funnies section, as I was, there are all these ads for these scary movies jumping right out at you, which is a way of saying in the 80s with the slashers, they're not just at the movie theaters. They were kind of everywhere. It really seeps into the culture.
I was going to save this question until later on, but I feel like we were talking about Halloween and Halloween being a better movie than Friday the 13th. And on another feed, we have Crawlspace movies. So this is Crawlspace, the show where we talk about a lot of true crime stuff and pop culture stuff. And we were talking about movies quite a bit with a fellow colleague, and we decided that we wanted to just have this other feed, Crawlspace movies. And on this feed, we talked about horror movies that took place during holidays. So one of them was Black Christmas. And you answered one of my biggest questions that I've had about Black Christmas, because Black Christmas, in my opinion, is a better made movie than Halloween. Just technically speaking, it's a better made movie. You can spot less flaws in the plot development. You can spot less like just filming flaws in it, but it didn't do as well, and it's just not as scary. And you answered the question in your lecture. It didn't get large release because it went up against,
I think it opened against Godfather Part 2.
Godfather Part 2.
It is up in 1974. I think it's up against Godfather Part 2.
Right.
So they pull it back and they release it again in the summer, where it opens against Jaws.
Against Jaws, right? I knew there were the two movies, so they tried twice. It got beat out of the box office twice. The thing that answered the question, even though I think that the performances are better in Black Christmas, and I'm more of a fan of Halloween, by the way, it was the cynical nature that the teenagers had in Black Christmas that did not relate to people like it did in Halloween. And in Halloween, you had teenagers who were just doing teenage things. And They just wanted to drink, have sex, and they suffered consequences that they weren't expecting. And in Black Christmas, there was always a cynicism hanging over it.
Black Christmas is a much more, it's a complex film in that, there's an abortion subplot. There are all sorts of things about the authority of the co-eds versus their den mother. There's a lot going on in Black Christmas, and I think that's part of the reason it might be a better movie, but it doesn't succeed. I certainly think it's a better movie than Friday the 13th. But Friday the 13th is sort of light and fluffy in terms of the characters are not. One of the things that everybody says, critics and casual fans alike, characterization is not the strong suit of a slasher movie. And that's part of its charm. I don't think these are quite turn your brain off films, but you're not always there to see the characters. Hey, fun fact I didn't get to fit in about Black Christmas. It's directed by a guy named Bob Clark. Famously, he was a Canadian film director. This is when Canada is actually giving subsidies if you'll film in Canada. So Bob Clark goes on to create A Christmas Story, and then he finally he reached Canada's goal. Canada really wanted a major motion picture that would make $100 million in America. Do you know what the first Canadian film to make $100 million in America was?
Porky's. Same
director. I do love
a good movie, by the way.
I think you and I disagree on that, but that's
not saying great.
But this is the kind of. But I mean, bringing up Porky's, it's another kind of movie that is titillating, that normally showed in lower class grindhouse theaters, and is about teens trying to lose their virginity. It's not a coincidence that these both sort of become big in the 80s. They're cheap to make. People will go to them. So you can make dozens and dozens of them and still turn a profit. As much as anything cultural in the U.S. that shaped the rise of slasher movies, that change in Hollywood from the 70s to the 90s creates this really interesting era when these movies get made. They're very repetitive, but some of them are pretty trippy. In some ways, they're much bigger risk takers than a lot of films today.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Now, I apologize in going back in time a little bit with this question, but your Audible series really made me want to watch Psycho again. Definitely one of my favorite movies of all time. I had no idea that there were so many restrictions on that movie and that Hitchcock and the crew actually met the guidelines. Can you explain how that happened and I guess the trick that movie played on audiences?
Probably more has been written about Psycho than any other movie. because it's, it's a great movie for movie people who are really into the way movies are made, but it's also a thriller movie. It's amazing on all levels. If you don't like Psycho, that's fine too. What's interesting about Psycho is it is made underneath the Hollywood production code, which means that there is no blood, which means that there is no nudity, which means that good triumphs over evil, which means that the cops are all portrayed in a positive light, and it means that sort of good wins and evil loses. And yet, Hitchcock and his crew are able to make a story that once the movie ends, you don't think, for the most part, you don't think that's what happened. A lot of people have seen it and think that they did see a knife going into someone's body, or that they did see someone naked on screen, and they certainly don't think good triumphed over evil. It's a masterpiece in it adheres very much to the letter of the law. I think that one of the reasons Psycho doesn't kick off, and I do think it's an inspiration to these later slashers. It doesn't kick off a slasher boom, though, in part because it's very hard to do that. There's a movie called Straight Jacket that comes out soon thereafter, which is not nearly as good, but sort of is trying to do the same thing. And no one else could sort of pull that off. A spoiler alert for a movie that came out before I was born. At the end of Psycho, of course, it pulls in on Norman Bates's face, and there's a voiceover, and he slowly smiles at the camera. He's in jail, so yes, evil has been punished, but he gives you this terrifying smile. I don't think he's smiled like that in the whole movie. That's how Hitchcock is able to sort of play with that. But it was made completely under code restrictions. A much more typical film under code, if you've ever seen the 1955 movie Night of the Hunter, it's a great movie about a preacher who's killing people, and then at the end, he dies. Again, spoiler alert, he dies. And then there's a Christmas scene at the end where the children that he was terrorizing all have this nice Christmas, and I'm like, oh boy, the evil preacher's gonna jump out. No, it just ends with it's 20 minutes of Christmas at the end, because it has to end positively. Good has to succeed. Evil has to be punished. Yeah, Night of the Hunter is great, and just know when you get to the Christmas scene, it's over. You can turn it off right then.
I do like the theory that the voiceover, going back to Norman Bates in jail, the camera's pushing in on him, and the voiceover is the mother's voice, but that voiceover and what she's saying has so many different meanings. And by saying they're probably watching me now is almost a reference to that board.
Yeah, the censor's board.
They're probably watching me right now. I never made that connection. I've seen Psycho 1,000 times.
I'm a big believer in, if you want to go deep in films, great. And if you don't, that's probably fine too. Let's go deep into Psycho for a second. There's all kinds of things in that movie about seeing, about how we're perceiving things. When Janet Leigh, okay, again, spoilers, Janet Leigh dies.
What?
The camera focuses, Tim just said, what?
No.
The camera focuses in on her eye, and then it pulls out. And the camera work is always sort of drawing you to things you see, particularly mirrors. There's a part where Norman Bates spies on his victim. The picture that he removes to get to the peephole is a picture of a classical rape scene. And then, of course, he sees through the peephole. He sees her nudity. We, as an audience, do not. There's all these kinds of things that Hitchcock is doing. He does this a lot, but that are drawing attention to the fact that this is a movie and we're seeing it. And hello there, it wasn't the ratings board back then, but hello there, production code. You're watching. What are we allowed to see versus what is there to be seen? The fact that you never see Mother almost through the whole movie, because it adds to that effect that there's this major character. Mother is somewhere in the Bates Motel. We don't know where. We never get a hint until the very end. Fascinating. It just makes for multiple viewings.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't get old. It's on our Halloween viewing list every year here. And there's always something to either kind of chuckle at because it was so witty, like the way it was shot or the way it was acted, or just brand new that you just never noticed before.
I did a lecture, that referenced Sleepaway Camp 2, and the Ghoulies. I'm okay with cheapo horror. It's not. It doesn't. I think that those are good to watch too. But a really great horror movie is not really. People will always say this. It's not about jump scares, but it is about you live through the fear of it, and then you start watching it, and you keep taking it apart. And if you're really lucky, you unlock some stuff in there that makes it even scarier and more frightening, and it sticks with you in a good way.
Now, here's just a random question. If you could watch any movie from the Halloween, Friday the 13th, or Nightmare on Elm Street series besides Halloween Part 1, which would it be and why?
Okay. The best of those three franchises, Nightmare on Elm Street is the strongest. Well, I would almost watch a Nightmare before any of I would watch Halloween first, obviously. But then I'd probably watch almost any Nightmare. Although I confess, I did not see Freddy versus Jason. I left that to the next generation. They can work on it. I don't think I watched. Well, I ended at 1993, so I didn't have to watch Jason X either. The Nightmare series are fun because actually when Wes Craven creates Nightmare, is actually right when the slasher boom was probably coming to its end, which is to say the slasher films that hit in the 80s, 81, 82, all were pretty big. By 83, they're all bombing. What Nightmare on Elm Street does in the late 80s is it sort of takes the slasher film and adds in, and this is a weird thing to say, it adds in a lot of art house stuff. Craven is a college English professor, graduates from Wheaton College, an evangelical Christian school. So Craven's a fascinating filmmaker. He takes a lot of stuff from older French movies, avant-garde films, and sort of starts putting some stuff in them. And I mean, as anyone who's seen the movies will know, the draw of the films is you never know when you're slipping between reality and the dream world. So in a certain sense, it's still a slasher movie. Freddy is still hunting down teens. The teens are still pretty dumb. One thing I love about the original Friday is Johnny Depp's character cannot seem to get the message that he's not supposed to fall asleep. So he just could constantly falling asleep. But in some ways, it takes the setting of Everytown, USA, and then just explodes it, and all sorts of weird, bizarre stuff can happen. And of course, Hollywood then copies that, and you start getting pretty, some really out there kinds of movies, from classics like The Fly or The People Under the Stairs to films like The Stuff, which is about an evil ice cream. The weirdest ideas, particularly in that last half of the 80s, just got made straight to movies. One caveat about that, as the author Dean Koontz mentioned, that he sometimes when he would pitch an idea to a Hollywood studios, they said yes because they were coked out of their mind. So let's keep that in mind when we said, how did these movies get made? Some of the executives may have been taking a lot of cocaine. We will probably never know.
But Wes Craven, what was the term that was applied to these? What, rubber reality or something?
Rubber reality, yeah. He called them rubber reality movies.
And he just keeps breaking the rules. And Tim and I have had this conversation a lot because I wasn't a huge fan of, was it New Nightmare? Until Tim was such a big fan of it. And I was like, what did I miss? Yeah, so I rewatched it and I was like, wait a sec. Wes Craven just keeps reinventing the genre and then playing into and leaning hard into the meta part of the genre, which he did with Nightmare on Elm Street, and he did it again with Scream. Scream was like a perfect example of meta on top of meta on top of meta, and even when you didn't think it could get more, it needed to get more.
For those who don't know, meta is short for meta narrative, which means stories about stories or movies about movies. One of the things that slashers increasingly do, not just Craven, but as they get longer in the tooth, as they get older, they start referencing each other. You begin to have movies where people have seen horror movies before and they're aware of them. They act in certain ways. Another way of saying the filmmakers know that you're watching a horror movie. Wes Craven got very good at this because, again, he wanted to, I think, break the rules with Nightmare on Elm Street. So he says, well, some of this is happening in the dream world. So again, suddenly the idea of a crazy person chasing you with a sharp knife, you don't have to worry about making it realistic because it's happening in the dream world, right? As I think I said in the series, by the time you're in Friday the 13th Part 6, you have to be a moron to go to Camp Crystal Lake. And that's why it's nice to stick it all in the dream world or have magic come in, because then suddenly, okay, we're already suspending our belief. Scream, and there's another movie called Popcorn that did it before Scream, but just not as well. Scream is famous because it's a horror movie about, it's sort of a horror movie about horror movies. It's if in the 1980s the ultimate the specter of slasher movies was what's going to happen to this generation of kids who are growing up on horror movies and don't understand the difference between reality and a movie. That's exactly the problem in Scream, is that the kids don't understand that, like, when you're stabbed, they think stabbing people is going to be fun. The ghost face is doing it to get a story going, to be like a movie. When we talk about it sort of being a meta narrative, it's not just the plot, but also the way these movies are constructed. This is a really minor point, but sometimes my students have a hard time buying the fact that's like, Dr. Jortner, what do you mean the filmmakers put all this stuff in there? Why, if they want something to be in there, why would they just do a subtle clue? There's a moment in Scream where Sidney, our main character, of course, Scream is all about phones. Old school landlines, which play a huge role in a lot of early movies like Black Christmas, like Halloween. The phones play an important role. There's a film called Don't Answer the Phone. The phone plays a big role in the film Scream. And there's a moment in sort of a throwaway scene where our hero, Sidney, is walking through a modern house, and there, as she walks through one of the rooms, is an old-timey telephone on the wall, like a big 1902 rotary dial. It plays no role in the scene, and there's no way anyone building that set would have said, well, here in this 1990s house, we need an old-timey phone. It's there to let you know that Wes Craven knows that you're watching a movie. And maybe you see it and maybe you don't. And it's just sort of these little Easter eggs that he's putting in there for us. I think ultimately what that sort of gets at is this question about the differences between movies and real life, and how we do, in fact, often shape the way we interact with people through movies. John Hughes, I'm looking at you for shaping the way that teens thought you had to ask someone out on a date in the 1980s. I'm thrilled that young people now can just ask somebody out on a date. If you watch a John Hughes movie, getting someone to go to the prom with you is like, it's like trying to get Frodo to go to Mount Doom. It's the biggest thing in the world. And I think a lot of kids internalize that. And we also internalize these horror movies. What are we supposed to be scared of? How are we supposed to act? Can you get out of a bad situation, right? We normally think of, well, the way to survive an emergency or a natural disaster is, well, you got to be quick-witted, but you got to be really tough. In reality, that's not how it works. To an extent, the movies that we watch shape the way we act.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
What is your favorite movie that you watched for this project?
I have a couple answers to that. One is I had never actually seen the original Child's Play. That thing is great.
Wow,
Part of the reason it is great is I wouldn't have realized this if I'd seen it in 1989. I am used to CGI, and I expected that Chucky doll to be walking around and talking to me, through computer animation. It doesn't happen. The director is smart enough that the Chucky doll is literally just a doll through about half of the movie. And that really makes it very chilling and very, very realistic and wonderfully spooky. That was a great one. Same actor, Chris Sarandon, is in Fright Night, which is another one of my favorites. But I will say this. A lot of what I saw in these movies was sometimes the movie is just terrible. And then in the middle of it, there's this amazing part. And the movie I want to talk about is the Final Terror, which is a 1983 movie right at the bust part of the cycle. It's got some famous people who later became famous in it. Daryl Hannah's in it, but it's awful. They kill someone with the sharp edge of a tin can. You know how your mom always tells you to be careful with the tin can lid because you'll cut yourself? Well, she was right. That movie is 90% bad. And then right at the end, all of the main characters are sort of walking through it. It takes place in the Redwood Forest. And they're sort of walking through the Redwood Forest. They know the killer is out there somewhere, but also the person who's leading them, who is a Vietnam veteran, is beginning to become very unstable. And it is a real masterpiece, I think, of filmmaking stuck in the middle of this otherwise pretty crummy movie where all these gigantic trees are dwarfing them and there's this real tension. I think that's one of the great things about these movies is that there's a lot of schlock in them, but one thing that was really enjoyable is just sometimes there are these scenes that really just pop. They were not bound by convention nearly as much as we are today because, again, it's only going to cost $100,000. Let them do whatever the studio's not going to lose money if you make some crazy weird decision. So I definitely found those to be quite delightful. I did fast forward through. There are some parts where they're just driving around for 10 minutes and you have to fast forward. But that's also when you're thinking about movies, not just as someone who enjoys movies, but as you're trying to think about the history of movies, you have to look at the good, the bad, and the indifferent. And while there are some of these movies that are just roaringly awful, most of them they're just going through the paces, and those can be sort of hard to watch in a different way. But it's really important, that it's not just your Halloweens and your Friday the 13th and Fright Nights and all of these and Lost Boys, these great movies. It's also the fact that thousands, millions of people maybe didn't see the Reanimator, but they saw something like it. And this was a ritual that a huge chunk of the American population went through if they grew up between 78 and 98.
Now, you referred to these slasher movies as sort of a who's next and less of a whodunit. Do you find any similarities between that kind of movie, like a slasher, and a disaster movie like the Poseidon Adventure?
Very much so. And again, disaster movies, also a big deal in the 1970s and early 1980s. I've been talking a lot about the money behind these and the history of these films. The message, of course, is very much like a disaster movies. There is something bad out there. It is coming for you. There is nothing you can do about it. These are, for the most part, pretty nihilistic movies. The disaster movie is all about something terrible happens and then people have to show their grit to get out alive. And some people are going to be really brave and they sacrifice themselves. Go on without me. There's something very similar in the slasher movie, right? People are going to try to get by the killer, try to outsmart the killer. There are definitely some early movies where they didn't have that in there yet. And then they don't know the killer's there, then they die. When they do know, then it becomes this really interesting struggle. And of course, talk a little bit about the final girl character. The final girl is the one who usually gets out alive. She does it because she recognizes what the threat is. And while other characters are trying to balance their needs and their desires with their desire for safety, usually the final girl puts safety first. She's the first one who figures it out, which is to say, she is thinking the way that you, the audience, are thinking. You know there's a killer. She knows the killer. Everybody else doesn't know there's a killer. Why are they so dumb? In the sense, it's also kind of it's a survival movie the way a disaster movie is. Not necessarily a survival movie the way it is in the 2020s, but it is about sort of, can you survive this deluge of evil that's about to come onto your town.
There's a modern thriller horror. I don't know if it's a slasher, but it does take those elements and works it into the plot. And I think it's a brilliant movie, probably one of the more current ones that I can't seem to find like a lot of flaws in, and I really love. It Follows.
Yeah.
And that takes the whole we're teens trying to lose our virginity, it takes that trope and actually makes that the villain.
I love It Follows. Part of what I'm going to go real professor-y on you, everybody, okay? I apologize. Part of what I really love about it is, first of all, the fact that it manages to shock us. To be totally blunt about it, it shocks us with full male nudity, which was something that was not, for the most part, in these films. And just that is something that and again, that has to do with what we expect to see in a horror film or on any film, and what then appears. And this sort of idea of it is slowly coming towards you, and it is sort of unstoppable unless you can push it off onto somebody else. Yeah, It Follows is doing a lot of there's a lot of heavy lifting going on there. In a sense, it sort of takes the question of teen sexuality seriously, which is a weird thing to say about a horror film. But of course, in the 80s, for the most part, the sexuality is only in there to titillate the audience. Very, very rarely is teen sexual activity germane. It's usually not necessary to the plot. I hope I haven't ruined anyone's enjoyment of these movies. But the violence and the nudity is in there so that people will come and see it. They will come to see it for the titillation, which used to be sort of a grindhouse special. And again, I think you can have a movie with nudity and violence in it that is a great movie. Most of these were not that. But I think It Follows, turns it on us and says, okay. But there are dangers, with in sexuality and with teens being sexually active. Let's talk about that without it being an ABC after-school special.
So where is the horror and slasher genre now, and does it have a bright future in your opinion?
It was hard to say. This was a sort of a hard one to sum up. I think the great age of slashers is over. As I sort of talk about in the series, the slashers get replaced by the thriller, which is like a slasher, but less so. It's the same basic principle of there's a killer out there doing violent things, but there's a lot more character development. The villain usually has a personality. No offense to Mr. Freddy or Jason, but they're not well-designed characters. The modern slasher, I think, tends to be very much focused on aping its predecessor, and they can be really good. They can be quite enjoyable. On the other hand, one thing that I think can't be replicated is the cheapness of those movies, which is to say, sometimes when they do something really great, it feels almost like luck rather than intent. To put it a different way, a film like Reanimator, which is a horrific film, it's way too much on every level. It's also maybe a masterpiece. It is so crazy. I mean, we're talking about a film where a decapitated body has spring-loaded organs that jump out and strangle somebody. And that was sort of created, I don't want to say unintentionally, but nobody was paying attention to the people who were making Reanimator in 1985. They just made the damn thing. And today, because particularly in mainstream Hollywood, every movie takes a tremendous amount. You just do not get movies made cheaply anymore by any major studio. So everything is much more careful. Everything is much more structured, which I think removes some of the surprising, very weird elements of that genre. On the other hand, I do think that horror movies really feel like they've really upped their game in the last few years. I think we've gotten a lot of very good horror films. Horror works best, I think, when it pokes at a place that we don't want to really talk about. In that sense, I think horror does a very important job. Now, maybe it talks about it well, maybe it talks about it poorly. I just finished watching the film Companion, which I'm going to be thinking about for a very, very long time, because it's a movie that is about someone who thinks he has a right to a personal robotic assistant. Because his life is difficult, he's allowed to have a robotic assistant who will do whatever he wants. And then the plot sort of evolves from there. It sort of asks that question. I thought that was an excellent film. I thought Megan was a really good movie for thinking about, well, what is it that we want? Oh man, we would love to have more time. And it is about the difficult, as someone who's a recent father, I think about, it's hard to raise kids. It sure would be easier. And the fact that people do want to sell us things that take us away from our families and then market it to us as, you're finally going to get some you time. And I'm a big fan of you time. I'm a big fan of, we all need to take some time for ourselves. We all need to do self-care. But that can also be weaponized, and that's hard to talk about. And maybe a spooky movie can do that for you. And just a quick, I want to put in a plug for Nope. Get Out. I think everybody saw. I don't know how many people saw Nope, but it is also about seeing things, and it's also about thinking that you have control over things. And I will tell you, there are some moments in Nope where I was crawling out of my seat in a good way. Sometimes I crawl out of my seat in a bad way, like in Reanimator. Especially when my friend's dad found us watching it in the basement. Just at the moment, there's a particular moment in that movie you don't want the parents to come in at. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. That was a bad me crawling out of my seat. But in some of these new horror films, I am sort of encouraged to get up out of my seat. And I think there's an extent to which horror is much more socially, it's much more acceptable, which is a weird thing. It used to be there must be something wrong with you if you like a horror film. I think that has changed, and I think that's good and bad. There are definitely some people who are trying to do, I think I referenced this in one of the lectures, the beginning of one of the more modern Screams. I think it might be Scream 6 or Scream 2022, but she answers our victim answers the phone, and Ghostface says, "What's your favorite scary movie?" And she goes, "Oh, The Babadook. It's elevated horror. It makes you think about social and political things." And Ghostface says, "That sounds kind of boring." So there's that. But I think there are a lot of interesting new ideas sort of bouncing around out there. I mean, we have access to more of them than we could possibly ever watch. So I encourage people to see the new ones, but also there's a lot of free streaming out there that's throwing us some old classics. I'd like to thank the Tubi streaming service, which allowed me to see a lot of these schlockfests without having to pay. I did not want to shell out $3.99 to watch Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which is a good movie.
Check out Pan Man on Tubi. That's a good one too. I don't know if you came across that one yet. That's a spoofy horror movie.
Well, we'll send you a link.
Yes, we sure will. This has been an absolute blast speaking about these movies with you and about your lecture series, this special from Audible. Definitely highly recommend it. Slash and grab Horror of the 80s. You can get it on Audible, as well as many others by Mr. Jortner. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.